Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are joining us from in the world today. I am David from Valued, and let's just bring up those lovely little introductions. You've all seen me, but well, I say you've all seen me before. We might have some new starters joining us
We
today. So
might.
if you are new,
Yeah.
welcome. I'm David from Valued Academy, and I am joined by my wonderful friend Liz from Ginger Snap Consulting. And
Good morning.
we are your hosts today. That's as close as it's getting. But we are also joined in the background, as usual, by our wonderful friends from Workflow Max by BlueRock. They will be supporting us ably today in terms of answering your questions as they come through, and also in terms of just keeping us on track. Because today, what will we cover? Today, we will be covering settings in your system. I'd actually probably better go back to the welcome screen and say, guess what we're covering? We're covering settings, mastering them today. Workflow Max has a plethora of settings. I think that's a fair word, isn't it, Liz? We've got a plethora of
Plethora.
settings in the system.
Yes, there's a lot
Um,
of tinkering that can be done, isn't there?
yes, just a bit. And they can obviously lead to quite a bit of confusion and also just a simple plain fact of not knowing what you don't know. So if you don't know that a setting exists, how are you supposed to go and change it and use it? So today we are aiming to give you that knowledge, to bring you up to speed on where you can find all of these little nooks and crannies within Workflow Max that say this is how you make it do what you want it to do. I'll flick back to what we're going to cover today. So what we've got quite a range of topics today. And again, I apologize right now. This is a little bit dry, this session. I mean, there's no way of dressing this. There's nothing sexy about settings, I'm afraid. They are
Yeah.
clever at what they do, but they're a necessary evil. They are just one of those things that it's a case of, yep, we need that knowledge. We will take it and digest it. But yeah, prepare yourselves, guys. Plenty of caffeine. We'll make it through. But we're going to cover general settings within the system, probably one of the biggest areas of settings that you'll deal with. We're going to deal with profile settings. These are your own individual settings as a user, essentially, and often the ones that people don't realize are there, funnily enough.
Mm.
We're going to editing number sequences, as was described this morning, hiding in plain sight, but yes, easily enough accessible when you know where to look. We're going to deal with job settings. We're going to deal with client settings. We're going to deal with the collaboration manager. And finally, we're going to have a little look at personalize as well. Now, you might not think that there's much to do in personalize. Well, it says personalize, it's features, really. Personalize is one of the features that we'll look at. But yes, we will work our way through these. And believe me, it might not seem like it's going to take 45, 50 minutes, but it will, because there's quite a few to go through. So, without further ado, we will begin with your general settings. So I'm just going to minimize everybody who's in my view. And we're going to move straightly into product here. So how do you get to your settings within Workflow Max? Well, click onto your business tab, and at the bottom of the drop-down list, we have settings. This is the same as it was in the old platform for all of you old guard who've moved across. For all of you new people, business and settings. You'll see that we then have instantly access to our organization settings. And you can see that on the left-hand side, we have a whole swathe of sections that we can go into. We're not dealing with all of these today. There are many other settings that we can ultimately go into, but really what we want to try and cover today are your key settings, your basics that will help you get the most out of just using your system on a day-to-day basis. You'll see we've got features here. This includes personalize that we will look at in a bit. And we can see that there are other options in here as well. There are integration settings. That's a whole webinar in its own right. There are notification settings and various things as well, but we're concentrating very much in here at the minute. So in terms of our organization settings, we're going to work down what we've got. I'll quickly skim down and show you the extent of this. Please ignore the huge list of tax types. And you can see there are quite a few settings in here. Now, the good news is you might not use all of them, but until you know what they are, you can't make that choice. So here we go. First of all, your account settings. When you created your account, you will have given it a name, you will have given it a time zone. And what you will see is it will have also, oh my goodness, there's my Actual phone number. That's my business phone, don't worry. So again, as far as that's concerned, this would be your I can't even remember my own works phone number, but that'll do. But this would be your information that it would have pulled through from the form that you filled in when you were setting up your system as a demo account. What you can then do is you can embellish this with your details. So this would be Office 101 viewpoint. And you can fill the rest of your address in here. These address details will appear on any of your system default documents in terms of your details. These are your preference terms. Now, one thing that we're probably not going to go into today, but it is worth mentioning, is that a number of these fields, quite a number of these fields, can impact things that we see on custom document templates. Now, we're going to come and mention those when we talk about feature settings in a little bit. But again, custom documents is essentially a webinar in its own right. There's a whole swathe of things that we can talk about in terms of that. But this, as your preference settings, is one of them. This is essentially the information that says this is who we are and this is where we are. Moving on down, you now have a series of options that give you the chance to change what you call certain things. So do we call tasks tasks? Do we call phases phases, or folders, as you've seen me call them here? This is a hangover from the original Workflow Max. Do we call unassigned elements within a job, things that aren't in a phase, something else? Do we call them, I don't know, freestanding or something like that? Do we call costs costs, or do we call them disbursements? And again, options, which refers to your quotations. Do we call them options, or do we call them optional extras, or whatever you want to call them? So again, this is your chance to personalize how you refer to certain things within Workflow Max itself. Before I move on, I would say if I change something, so if I call this disbursements, you'll notice that that still says save. That was already in green. It doesn't change the way it does in certain other screens in the system. So don't be fooled. You do still need to hit save changes if you want to save that as you move forward. So do remember to do so. Once you've done it, it will tell you it's saved, and that's fine, and you can move on. Unfortunately, if you do navigate away without saving, it doesn't warn you.
You will. Worth pointing out probably that the screen name doesn't change. This is to do with your custom templates, isn't it? You know, sometimes people change folders and
it will never say any other phases in the system. It's only when you print your quote or your invoice that it will say that's folders, not phases. But yeah, it's worth knowing. If you are using the premium version of Workflow Max, then you will have the option of how you display people's names. So again, here we've got first name, last name. You can change that to last name, first name, last name. It's entirely up to you which way around you have that, so do be careful on it. Did you notice, Liz, now that I refreshed that once, it did go grey until I changed that. Watch, it'll go back. No, it won't go back. All right, so it's not like the other screens. So I was right. It is
it's not the inline editing, is it?
Again, do read any notifications that you get like that telling you what the implication of your change will be. So something that is critical, it will warn you, it will tell you. So something like this, it absolutely can have quite an impact if you are linked to, in this case, 0. So because names need to match, it's a crucial thing. We don't want to end up creating duplicate contacts just because we've changed a format. So do be very, very careful about things like that. So likewise, if you're using the premium version, do you want to include other name, middle name as it is, within your records? So again, this will appear within your list of your client names. You can then display that middle name if you wish to. And you can also see that generally by default, I would say, we've got show postal address as an option within here as well. Now, this is not a premium setting. This is a standard setting. All it means is that you have a choice of which client address you wish to display in your system. So again, when we're looking at our list of clients, we can either see their physical address or their billing address or their postal address. So we have that choice essentially between the two. Often, if we're integrated with 0, we will show the postal address because this then matches up with the primary address in 0, which forgive me, but it's been one of the craziest sort of integration weird things for so many years, is that if you have your physical address as your primary address in Workflow Max, that's the secondary address in Xero. So it creates so yeah. So we often have this set as a default tick, frankly. Moving swiftly on. We then have how you deal with your costs. So most businesses, many businesses have costs that they incur, which are not time related. And here is how we can control the default of how we deal with those. So first of all, are we displaying well, I would say first of all, here, the markup or the decimals as 2 decimal places, which I think makes a lot of sense, but you can also have 4 decimal places as well. So if we're concerned about rounding, etc., then we do have the option of using 4 decimals when you're showing your costs. You can also set your default markup here as well. So again, if I say that a cost is 100, my markup here would then put my price to my client as 130. So again, automatically putting that calculation into the system. We also have the ability to say whether by default, these costs should be billable or non-billable. Now, again, most of the time I would suggest this should be billable. I have on occasion seen it where they are non-billable, but this again is a default blanket setting. Neither of these are well, certainly the decimals you can't change in situ, but the markup and the billable nature of a cost, you absolutely can override when you are adding those to your quote, your job, etc. You can certainly mark those up by any amount you wish, and you can also individually flag them as billable or non-billable. So these are just setting the overall starting point for those items. In terms of financial, this is one that will change depending upon whether you're integrated with Xero. So without an integration with Xero, we will see that we do have a number of tax codes listed, and it would be a manual process to add or update the ones that you would see there. Once we're integrated with Xero, this will then sync with the tax codes that appear, or tax treatments that appear within Xero. And at this point, there's nothing that you can change about those. If you need to change those, you're going to need to do it in Xero, but otherwise it's very, very straightforward, and it just mirrors what you've got in your financial system. You can see that if we've got your premium version, we also have your financial year that we can deal with there. And as we move on down, we're now moving into the territory of lock dates. Lock dates are something that, I don't know about yourself, Liz, but I find people probably don't use these as much as they could.
No, agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. A lock date, it sounds like, why would I need it? It's actually quite useful. What you can do with your lock date is make sure that once you have reported upon a period, you can lock it so that people can't make further changes to that. Without applying your lock date, you'll find that anybody could go in and raise an invoice, a purchase order, change a timesheet, do whatever they want to. And that really can play havoc with your historical reporting. So if you then went back and reported on that period again, you could get a totally different set of figures. So it actually makes a lot of sense to apply a relevant lock date. And again, all we do, tick the box, choose the date, tick the box, choose the date, and that is literally it. You do have your 2 different lock dates here. So your first one prevents people from adding, editing, or deleting timesheets or job costs. And the second one prevents people from adding, editing, or deleting invoices. So I would just use them both potentially. But yeah, at the same time, do be aware of those. And you can obviously remove them as well or change the dates on them. So if you do legitimately need to go back and change something, you can certainly do so. But they're just a safeguard.
I tend to see that clients who bill on time and materials use lock dates a lot because they will literally do their whole billing cycle, put the lock date on, and away you go to the next cycle. But you can equally do it at quarter end, can't you, when you don't, or maybe quarter or whatever your reporting function is.
This is just it. It's a useful thing to tie in with your financial period. So whether that be monthly, quarter, etc., it is certainly worthwhile thinking about the use of these. I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
Jobs. Now, these are not job settings. We're going to deal with job settings in a minute over there, but these are your sort of defaults in terms of how your jobs will work. So we've got, first of all, your default job status. Here, you can see that I've got some custom job statuses in here as well. We'll talk about those when we look at actual job settings. But things like planned and in progress, on hold, completed, and cancelled, these are your standard default statuses. Now, why on earth you would ever put something as completed or cancelled as your default status? You just wouldn't. So, you don't want to raise a new job and have it immediately completed. But planned, in progress, even on hold, I suppose, they are potentials in terms of when you create that job, what should be the first status that is applied to it. You also have the option of applying a default job template as well. Now, thereby is a can of worms that we'll have a chat about. You can use templates within your system to predefine the content of your jobs. Again, it's a little bit beyond the scope of today's session because it is as unique as the business that you run. So that just to know that if you've got standard types of work that you engage in, you can use these templates to essentially give you a head start on building your job records or your quote records for that matter. This idea of a default job template really only factors in if you, I would say, spend most of your time doing one type of job or however you want to describe that. But if we did, we could have a standard template within there and we could select that. And all it means is that as we create the job, it automatically uses that template for us. So again, it's an automation, but it depends whether it would work for you. Invoice state, here's an interesting one. Again, underused, but I would say for very good reasons. It depends on what you want to do. This particular little nugget means that if we raise a final invoice in Workflow Max, then the system can automatically move the status of your job to whatever you've got here. So if I say I have that as completed, then literally as soon as I raise a final invoice, the system will go, oh, thanks, David, we'll move this to completed for you. Now, there's the question. Is it right, once I've raised my final invoice, to move my job to completed? Or do I still have housework to do in that job? Do I need to write my final notes in, write off some last time that might have been entered, do anything else, tick off the fact that my to-do list is complete, however I want to do it? Again, do I then simply want this to disappear into the archived jobs because, again, it's done and it's finished? Or is that too far? Now, what we do have are the ability to create other statuses within here. So, for example, if you had fully invoiced or something like that, it could still be a live job state, but it would be a little bit more descriptive of where you're up to with your job. So again, things like that, have a think about it. But again, I would say don't worry if, and again, you can't really delete it once you've set it. That's an interesting one. I can't go back to select job state. I will have to refresh my screen. Let's just refresh that because I seriously don't want to set that as my job state. Let's just let that refresh and we'll go back down. So have a think about, it's kept it. All right. Well, I'll have to do something about that later. Never mind. So in terms of the next settings, we're talking about tasks and costs within your job records. So they appear in a certain order. Custom suggests that they will appear in the order in which you've added them. So if I add phase 1, phase 2, whatever I want to call my tasks, they will simply sit in the order in which I put them in. If you want to start scheduling those tasks out and giving them dates, then you can order them by their due date. Now that can be quite interesting. You lose the capability to manually move those around to suit yourself, but the system does automatically order them based on that due date. I find that a little bit prescriptive, personally. I like flexibility that comes with custom because I do sometimes like to move things around into the order that suits me. The same, I suppose you could say the same of job costs. They usually appear by cost date. Now, I personally do think that that is a good idea. I like the idea that I can see the most recent costs at the top and I can simply work through. However, you can again have it in a custom order if you wish. So very flexible, very much up to you. On to the biggies. Yeah, here we go. So task invoice rate. If we want to talk about a can of worms, this is the can of worms. So this particular setting controls the value which is ascribed to the time that people enter in terms of when we then come to raise our invoice. What does that mean? Well, if we have this set to staff billable rate, then the system will look at your staff records and say, these are the rates that you've applied to your staff, the billable rates, and it will use those to calculate the value of the time that people enter. So it will be their number of hours and minutes multiplied by their staff billable rate, and it will really use that to calculate your invoice. If you are a professional services business, pretty much without exception, I would say you're probably using staff billable rate, or you want to. Alternatively, you can have task billable rate. Now that kind of spins it on its head a bit, and instead of looking at staff rates, it's looking at the rates listed against your tasks. So first of all, you need your rates against your tasks if you want this to work. And what it will do is look at that task billable rate and then perform the calculation. So again, the number of hours that people have entered multiplied by the rate for the task that they've entered it against, and that is what we get. What this means is that this ignores who is entering the time. So it could be me as the office junior or you as the CEO, and our time is always worth the same because we're working on the same task. Whereas this ignores what task we're working on and says, well, guess what? Because you are the office junior, David, this is how much you charge out at, as opposed to Liz, who's the CEO, who charges out at a lot more or whatever. So again, have a real think about what that means. What I would say, and again, I'm just going to dive into my jobs very briefly because I want to show you another control that you have over that. It is a default position. So if I go into any job, doesn't matter which one, we'll see that we do have the option of financial settings. Now, as I create the job, it's a live job and I've got into it, I can go into this setting and I can, trust me to find one that's already been invoiced. Yeah. We can change this setting up to the point that we've raised our first invoice against the job. So we can have either staff billable rate, which was my default position, or if I specifically want this job to be using task billable rate, I can select that. As the warning message says here, as soon as you've raised your first invoice, that's it, you're done. Okay, so you can't change it after that. What you can change are these individual overrides. So here, because it's on staff billable rate, it would list my staff names, and I can always set custom rates for my staff here. Again, not particularly going into this in this session. Custom rates, whole ball game of its own. Likewise, if I did have this as task billable rate, I would see a list of task names here, and I could assign individual task values to these. So yes, that is, when I call it a biggie, it really is. That one has quite a significant impact on how your system works for you. So think about what you want it to do and how it can work best for you.
It affects your WIP and your invoicing, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it underpins pretty much the whole process. So again, it is important. It's not the end of the world. You got it wrong. You know, you can fix this, but it's just creating more work for yourself. So this is about getting it right, hopefully first time, because at least now you know what it does. Hand in hand with that does go time allocation. So again, you will see here, it's now down as time allocation is staff. If we were using task billable rate, you do have the choice of whether you want your time allocation to be to the staff member or to the task. I would say almost without exception across every system I've ever looked at, that's been set as staff. But yeah, I mean, there is the option of changing it. It's entirely up to you. Staff task allocation, another big one. Now, here, you can see it's saying inherit from job. The alternative here is explicit. Take a deep breath. Here we go. So in terms of inherit from job, this is the default. By default, the system will say, that's fine. If you assign somebody to the job, let me just come back to my job in question. I'll just click my back button. So if I assign somebody at this level, staff assigned, then they have access to add their time to every single task in that job. I don't need to do anything more. I've assigned them to the job. They're then able to work on it. It's fine if you've got fairly simple jobs, 3 or 4 tasks, nothing particularly complicated, that's fine. But what if you've got a job that has dozens of tasks? You might have several different departments working on the same job. They've all got their own areas that they need to be working on. If you present them with a list of, 36 tasks, that's an awful lot to wade through and a huge potential for people getting it wrong. Which is why you have the option of explicit. Explicit allocation, it means another layer of admin. So I apologize right now. You will have a job to do if you do this. What it means is that you then have two things to do. Not only would you assign the person to the job itself, which is fine, you would also then need to go either into each individual task and select the people that you want to work on it, or a bit more streamlined, click onto the staff allocation button within the job, and again, assign the right staff to their tasks within here. So here, I'm the only guy, so I'm there. But if I want to add more staff, I can absolutely bring somebody else in. And now I can start to say, well, Dave gets 10 hours and David Smith gets 5 hours, and we'll turn him on. So again, this is absolutely the process that you would then engage in. This is time consuming. I'm not going to say it's not. It is time consuming. There are certain shortcuts. So again, if you're looking at your jobs list, you can assign staff to jobs in bulk, and in so doing, you can select which tasks you want to assign them to. But that's still an additional layer of work that you're then performing. So again, bear in mind that if you want to go down that route, and there are benefits to it, it's just going to take time for you to populate that.
The benefits. You get a lot of questions, don't you? Usually it's a user who can't see the task, and
I'm trying to add my time, but it's not there. It's because you haven't the task. Or alternatively, and again, the other one is that you can, even without explicit allocation, you can still assign people to a task. But what it does, it means that people that you've named on the task can then work on that task. So it's almost explicit by simple default, I would say, at that
default,
rate. So, exactly. Have a think about that.
The moment one person goes onto the task, that's it. It locks it down to that one person, even though you've got inherit.
And you go down this wonderful rabbit hole where you then start having to assign lots of people to tasks just so that they can see them. And I have seen systems where people just by rote simply say, right, I've assigned everybody to every task. I think you don't need to do that if you're using inherit. Do potentially if you're using explicit, but it depends. The benefit of explicit allocation is very much around accuracy. So in other words, if you assign me to the explicit tasks that you want me to work on, I can't get it wrong at that point. So I can't put my time into somebody else's task by accident. I can only see the ones that I've been explicitly invited to work on. So it does help. It also makes those lists a lot shorter, so I can easily see what I'm adding my time to. But it is something to consider. And if you feel it's appropriate, don't be afraid to use it.
And with the allocation, you don't have to divvy up the hours. You can just take it on a task basis, can't you? And just say,
true.
Liz and David are on this task.
Yeah, as long as you're not putting estimated times in, you'll be all right with that. As soon as you start getting your estimates in there, then you're going to start to really dig into the extent to which you can start to schedule within WorkflowMax itself. So everybody take a breath. We've finished with the two biggies. Thank you very much. The next two interesting ones. The first one, when calculating estimated billings for a job, if the job has an accepted quote, base the calculation on the quote value or estimate value and not on the actual work on the job. What that's referring to is when we are in a job, we have our financial tab. And within that financial tab, the first thing that you see is your estimated billings. So again, this is entirely your choice. You can either have that reflecting what the actual time is that you've performed. This is now looking at it on a draft invoice because I probably didn't have any time in place. But if you do have a quote, and I don't have a quote on this one, if you have actual time and costs logged in here, then absolutely that would show for you. So that setting really is how I don't know whether I would describe it any differently. If we've got a quotation in there, it will apply that. That's possibly it.
As you kind of bill out portions of your quote, your estimated billings will go down. So that's what will show in your financial tab, rather than what you've actually worked.
Yeah. So the benefit of that, again, is if you tend to bill your clients from your quotations, it does make a lot more sense to have your estimated billings looking at the content of your quote, because that then you get a great idea of what is still left to bill your client. I know a lot of firms do use it with just the actual time and costs as a comparison, but again, entirely up to you. I personally, I would say if you do bill from your quote, look at your quote as your estimated billings. It just makes more sense to me, but there we go.
Yeah, you can always look at your financial summary to see your billables anyway, can't you?
Absolutely right. Always ways to look at that information. The next one is something that can catch a lot of people out. And yeah, you know who you are, and don't be afraid. You know, it was all fixable. But when adding a cost to a job, also add the cost to cost admin. What is cost admin, I hear you say? Well, costs. That list of costs on the left, which if we have a little look at it, is just all of your predefined costs within your system. So when that list loads in my horrible demo data, you'll see that we've got a list of, eventually, there we go, a list of costs within here. These could be all sorts of things, but essentially these are the items that you can search for and add to your jobs or your quotes or your purchase orders very quickly and very easily. The benefit of this list is that it's predefined. So you then have static descriptions, so you're not having to manually type them every time. You've got prices that you know will be accurate every time. You can even go as far as having things like defaults in terms of your zero integration related to these as well. So it is quite beneficial to have items listed in cost admin. It's only ever called costs. It's never been literally labeled as cost admin, but that's what it is. If, however, we have this ticked, as you create your job, if you add something unique to your cost list in the job, so if, on my job, if I said, I don't know, lunch or something like that, this lovely little tick will add lunch to my cost list in the background. Thank you. Great. Next person comes and adds subsistence instead of lunch. Next person comes and adds sandwich. And before you know it, we have dozens of items that all relate to the same thing because the system is very literal and says, oh, well, that's new. I will add it. So that list can immediately become very unwieldy. It can have lots of options in there that you don't necessarily want. So personally, I wouldn't have that ticked. Just me.
I've seen thousands, on the larger accounts, you easily see 21,000 items. Oh no.
Absolutely. And somebody looks at it with horror when they first see it and go, what happened here? It's like, well, you see this little tick box here? That's all it was. That was it. So again, you talk about the power of a setting. It is quite powerful. So do just bear in mind, do you want that ticked? Don't you want that ticked? It's worth noting. Moving on. Invoices. Default settings on your invoices. So is your invoice based on the content of your quote, or is it based on your time and costs? Again, this is a default. You get to choose when you raise your invoice, but it will suggest whatever your default is first of all. Similarly, your payment terms. I've got these set to 7 days after the date of the invoice. It's quite flexible, but again, you can override that in many ways using job settings as a job category. You can use your client settings as a client type, all sorts of things that you want in there. You've then got your time notes. Do you want these to be included in your invoice? And likewise, in terms of invoicing against a quotation, we can have a default percentage that we want to raise as a deposit invoice against the value of our quote. We also then have your footer details. If you're using your system default template, then it will show those as your footer. And likewise, if we wanted to include those items in a custom template, there is, I believe there is a merge field that will bring those through. Am I right on that one, Liz? I'm fairly sure.
I think there is. I just never use it, but I think there is.
We tend to write them directly onto the templates as opposed to use these, but again, it's entirely up to you. And finally, do we want to include phases in our invoices? So again, this is just giving you access to all of the information that phases give you, really. Payment advice. Yes, because we all still add tearaway payment remittance advices on the bottom of our invoice. We are still living in the
and we accept checks.
Yeah. I was going to say exactly. Frankly, it's another form of footer for want of a better word. So you can use it if you want to. You can put whatever information you want in there. Again, we rarely see it used, but it's there. And again, bearing in mind, these are only if you're dealing with your invoices and sending them to the client from within Workflow Max. If you're sending them from Xero itself, once these have come through from Workflow Max, these settings will not apply. KPI dashboard. So if you're using the premium version of the system, you will have capacity. And capacity is basically saying, guess what? How many hours a day do people work? Well, here is your default. The default of 8 hours for us, it could be 10 hours, 7 hours. It depends who you are. An 8-hour day is probably fairly standard, I would suppose. But again, it's just a default in the system. Purchase orders, a little bit like invoices. What are we including? So first of all, bulk purchase orders. If you did not know that you can raise bulk purchase orders, you can raise bulk purchase orders, and you can either group those by client or by job. It is very typical for them to be bulked by client. But again, it's your choice. You can bulk them by job number if you prefer. Default cost type. We have the choice between service and stock. So again, if it is a case that you're a professional service business, you tend to buy in freelancers, whatever, it's usually going to be service. If you are some form of construction industry business, then again, you probably will be buying in stock. And again, you might want it to be stock, but it is a default. You still get to change this. The same with your default delivery address. You can have something in there as a placeholder, or you can always update that when you raise your purchase order. Footer details, well, same as the invoice. It's entirely up to you. Again, include details in your footer if you wish to. Draft PO number. This is a good one. You have a choice. If you raise a draft PO, you don't have to give it a PO number if you don't want to. I would say pretty much by default, you might as well. There are those industries where it makes very little difference, so you might as well have it. There is all those industries where it's crucial. Whereas if you didn't have that PO number on your draft, you would be in trouble. You would have difficulty performing what you need to do. So again, just typically, I would say have that selected. Automatically recalculate a job cost unit price based on a markup. Setting it if the unit cost is edited so again, all that is telling us is that if I've got my cost in, it says it's 100 and its marked up price to the client is 130. If I change that to 200 as the cost, then do I want the system to automatically say, oh, well, guess what? That should now be 260 potentially.
New setting, isn't it, this one?
It is. I mean, you might not want to change the value to your client, in which case you would not want that to change. So you might not want to pass on any additional cost that you incur. So all of a sudden your supplier puts the price up. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can pass that on to your client. However, if you do want to take account of that and obviously charge the client more, then it's just quite nice to be able to do that automatically.
Yeah, useful.
Yes. Purchase receipts. So in other words, your supplier invoices. So again, days of payment. Is it 7 days? Is it 30 days? What do people generally do who you buy from in terms of their payment terms? Again, a default, not something that is set in stone. You can always change that when you're adding your receipts. Quotes. Apologies if I seem like I'm racing through this, but there's so much to get through, so I do apologize. Valid 2 days. So again, is it a 28-day quote? Is it a 60-day quote? A 90-day quote? This is entirely up to you. Accepted costs. So once somebody accepts the quote, do we want those costs to pull through to the job saying we are estimated costs and we might change? Or do we want them to be actual costs and immediately be there and visible as part of your financial figures on the job? So again, have a think about that. Same sort of situations in terms of footers. Notice that you've got different footers that you can apply to a quote or an estimate. That's usually because there's a different legal basis on quotes and estimates. An estimate is just that. It is an estimate. A quote is basically fixed. You said that's what you're going to charge. So again, you can have your different details there. Revision separator. Again, it's a funny little thing, but it is a thing. When you raise a quote, if you have to revise that quote, it will give you a separator between the original quote number and the revision number. So if I had quote 10 and I did my first revision, it would say 10/1 because slash is my separator. I could have it as a dash or a plus or whatever I want to. So again, have a think about that. I don't think I've ever seen anybody change that, frankly. Liz, have you?
Oh, I have. Yeah. A couple of accounts.
Fair enough. But you can imagine it's going to be something fairly simple. It's not going to be anything too complex. Reports. Now, this is a good one. Time format. You will see when you enter your time in the system, you can enter it as a decimal, you can enter it as hours and minutes, but it will always on screen revert to hours and minutes once you've entered it. In terms of your reports, that's not necessarily the case. So what you can do is tell the system how you want your reports to represent time entries. So do you want it to show hours and minutes, or do you want it to show a decimal? Quite recently, I've come across a number of clients where actually it is very beneficial to have it as a decimal, because when they export their report information into Excel or into CSV file, if you've got it as hours and minutes, it produces a wonderful horrid format, and it puts it as sort of 00:00, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's a standard.
Put it as a decimal, it'll say it's 1.5 hours or 1.75.
I change all my accounts to decimal because if you're going to do pivot tables and reports, it's just
exactly. It just makes life so much easier. So do have a think about that if you have a penchant for working with your data outside of the system.
Yeah.
Finally, in here, timesheet entries. So do we want to be able to enter time as a duration? So I've spent an hour on this. Or do we want to enter it as a start and finish time? So I started at 9, I finished at 10. Do we want people to have access to weekly timesheet entry? Why would you disable it? I hear you say, well, you would disable it because it makes it very easy to lie about your timesheets. You can wait till the following week and then simply bang in a week's worth of timesheets in a matter of seconds using weekly timesheet entry. So bear that in mind. Again, some people do turn it off, not that many, but some do. First day of the week, again, could be Sunday, could be Monday. If anybody starts on a Tuesday, I've never come across it, but you might, I suppose. Rounding, quite a common question that. How do we want to round? Well, you can round from anything from nothing up to 30 minutes. Bear in mind, this always rounds up. So if I have a 4-minute phone call and I've got 5-minute rounding, that's one thing. If I've got 4-minute phone call and it rounds to 30 minutes, my goodness, what's my timesheet going to look like? So do be aware of what that will entail if you select rounding.
And it's the rounded amount that is shown on the timesheet, isn't it? You don't get to keep the original amount of time that you put in, which is a bit.
You're quite very good point, Liz. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's just a blanket, you know. So if I said I was rounding to 15 minutes, you don't get to see that I only spoke to you for 10 minutes. It shows you the 15 minutes on your timesheet. So yeah, do be aware of that. Job order. So when we're adding our timesheets, do we want it to list the client name first or the job number first? If you're like me, you have no clue what the job number is. You know what your client's called. So you tend to have it by client number or client name. I do have 1 or 2 clients who are a lot better than me and do actually refer to their job numbers. So they do list it by job number. I leave that entirely up to you. So again, it will list job number followed by job name, as opposed to client followed by job number and job name.
Job number. Bizarrely, there must have more geeky clients who know the numbers.
Oh, and hey, vive la différence. This is what we get.
Yes.
Excuse me. So yeah, again, it all comes down to what works best for you. So don't be afraid to pick a setting that works best for you. Task order. So again, on your timesheet, do you want those tasks to be listed alphabetically, or do you want them to appear in the same order that they appear on the job? Again, an interesting one. I think it depends, I suppose. Alphabetically means it's just pretty easy to find, whereas task order or job order means that it's just more familiar in terms of this is the order in which we've got them set up. I see the benefits of both, really. Yeah, so it's an interesting.
Most people like it if they're quoted to be the quote order, don't they?
They do indeed. Absolutely true. Yeah. So those are your organization settings, and my goodness, did that take quite a bit of getting through. I do apologize. Moving swiftly on, before we get to profile settings, I'm going to skip and I'm going to talk about edit number sequences. And that's because we're right here. When you click into business and settings, you're automatically brought into your organization settings. And oh, look, on the right-hand side, edit number sequences. If I click into here, I can specify my numbering sequence from within Workflow Max, excuse me, for my jobs, my invoices, my purchase orders, and my quotes. I would suggest if you are creating your own invoicing numbering sequence from here, then do not mirror the one that's in Xero. In the past, there have been occasions where it might be beneficial. You might have had encountered certain issues or problems, and you want to simply use the invoicing sequence here to essentially recreate the number sequence from Xero. I'm sorry, I've got a real frog in my throat. So sorry, do beg your pardon. However, right now, this causes more problems than it solves. The reason being, Liz, could I just get you to take this? I'm just going to quickly cough my guts up.
Okay. The reason being because if, for example, your invoice for whatever reason doesn't go over to zero, it's very easy then to spot that it hasn't gone because it will have a different prefix than the one you have in zero. So yeah, keep them separate. Obviously, if you're not connected to zero, that's not an issue. And then with the POs, exactly the same as the job prefixes. You can state a prefix, a length of digits, and obviously your next number. And same with the quotes. They don't affect anything in zero because they don't go to zero. So
the preview here on the right is dynamic. It shows you straight away what you've got, depending upon what we're doing. It's just giving you a good idea of what that will look like. So that is editing number sequences right in there. Let's have a look then at what else we've got. So profile settings. Again, before we move on to the other items down the left here that we're going to cover, and obviously features as well, it's really good to have a quick look at your profile settings. So if you click into your initials or your little picture at the top right and click into profile settings, you're going to be given a set of options that are unique to you as a user. The reason I say unique to you as a user is exactly that. Nobody can set this for you. This is entirely up to you to deal with, okay? So first of all, you get the details that you were created with in terms of your name, your email address, etc., and your password. This is where you would come to change either your email address or your password, or indeed your name. You would also come here to enable your multi-factor authentication. So again, everybody has seen what 2FA does. It just makes it more secure when you're using your system. So by all means, if you want to set it up, click into here and you can do so. You also then have the ability to set, if you've got multiple accounts, which account you want to log into first every time you open Workflow Max. Again, it usually will be a primary account you use. You have the ability to turn on or turn off notifications that you would receive from the system. So again, we'll talk about this in terms of notification settings just within the system itself, but these are yours. So if you ever wonder why everybody else is receiving notifications and you're not, it's probably because you've turned this off. So go and turn it on. You do have an email signature. Right now, this is just a text field. So it is literally just an ability for you to write something in. People sometimes use this to add a little bit of pre-formatting to an email. So hi, thanks very much, whatever it would be. You can choose to automatically CC yourself into any emails you send from Workflow Max, which again can be quite useful, but can also be quite cumbersome. If you find that you're sending a lot of emails from the system, then you might wish to maybe not do that, but you can choose. And then underneath that, it begins as the default of saying send emails in job via new email via. What does that mean? Well, if I'm in a job, if I go to job actions, I've got new email right there. Based on that setting, if I just say send it from Workflow Max, it'll pop up an email modal, a little window pops up. I can write my email and send it. If I'm choosing my external mail client, then it will literally open up whatever your default mail system is. So if I just click on new email, and I think it should still open up Google for me. So there is my Gmail. It is opening up a brand new email for me. And there we go. Things to note within here. First of all, it's not going to do it now. It should, I didn't have an email address listed. It should have CC'd in the job number or the email my job that we had. This is because I've been playing around with my settings. But what it would do is it would put in automatically the forwarding email address from your collaboration manager, which we will also be discussing, and it will then capture that email in the job that you're referring to. So here, whatever I write in, it would then send it through. Once I've done it, I can simply click back and it will take me back into my job. If you're using Outlook, it will usually open Outlook as a separate tab anyway for you. But what we will then find is that once it's gone through, and here's one I did earlier, it will then bring this through in true Blue Peter fashion as a note. And if I had any documents attached to that, they would be coming through as documents. So then literally I've got that captured, logged, Everything very simple, very straightforward. And all that because I've told it to use my external email client. The last setting in preference in your own profile settings is this item about default numbers of rows in tables. So here we have anything from 10 through to 200. What this means is that when I'm looking at jobs, quotes, purchase orders, tasks, costs, whatever it may be, anything that is in a table in Workflow Max, you can max it out to up to 200 rows at a time, and it just makes it so much easier. So certainly if you're wondering why every time you go in, it says 10 rows and you've got to change it to say 200, it's because you haven't set it here. So do set it here and then everything will work for you. Let's come back to the other settings that we were referring to. So let's move on down. We'll do client settings because it's one thing. And I know that we're still short on time here. So again, I do apologize. In terms of client settings, usually if you're using the standard version of the system, you will have one option in here. So you will have client type. Client type is very simple. It's essentially a label saying what our client is or are or what they do. What we can do, you can see here in terms of payment terms and markup, is that we can use this in a slightly more automated fashion to say, well, in which case I want this client to pay on 30 days and we're going to mark them up by 40%, not 30%. So if I've got a client who I've applied this client type to when I created their record, then it will automatically apply these values when I'm dealing with costs in their jobs, raising invoices to them, etc. It will override any of my default settings and use those for me. You don't have to use those. So as you can see from my list, some of them are just blank, and that's because all I want to do is actually just use that as a label, which is fine. If you're doing that, you could have anything that you want in here. If you are using it to set some of these terms, you might want that name to reflect what this means. So again, use that as you see fit. If you're using the premium version of the system, you will also have access to business structure. Business structure is just that. It's telling us whether we're dealing with partnerships, individuals, companies, trusts, clubs or societies, whatever it might be. So you can set those up, and it does relate to a series of basic types in the background, but all that's doing is giving you that capability of understanding the nature of the client that you're dealing with. Ooh. We'll do collaboration manager. I know I'm skipping job settings. That's just because that is quite a biggie in its own right. So collaboration manager. In your settings, if I come back, we've got collaboration manager. Bearing in mind, all of this is under business and settings. We're just looking at this list on the left. When I click into collaboration manager, I have an ability to set up a forwarding or CCing email address for any emails I'm wanting to capture within Workflow Max. So here, my email address of valuedemo@emailworkflowmax.com. If I was to include that as a CC, a blind CC, or forward an email to that address, it would land in Workflow Max. If I did nothing else, it would land in that little envelope, and it would be here for me to triage, to literally put it to the right job or quote or lead if I'm using it, or client. So I've got all sorts of abilities to put that where I want it to be. Client is nice because we never used to be able to do that one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
However, if I want to be clever about this, I can start using things like in the subject line, adding in the likes of a job number or a quote number. And that will then bypass this triage area and put the item directly into the job or quote in question. In the case of leads, they all have their own internal reference anyway. So if I go into leads in here very briefly, you'll see that I'm hoping I've got one now, there should be a unique forwarding email address. So if I go into active leads and have a look at my lead here, we'll see it should list that forwarding address for us. And unlike the old system where you had to literally drag and then copy, we've got a beautiful little copy ability there, or simply an email button that you can use to actually go straight to sending something. So really very, very user-friendly in that sense. But that very easy to set up and also very easy to use. So have a think about that if you feel you need to take advantage of that. Features. You go on. let's flick back to job settings, because again, features is quite big as well. We'll complete this off as much as we can just within your general settings. General settings, job settings gives us access to 3 things: job category, job status, and job template. I'm only going to deal with 2 of these, and I'll tell you why. Job template is as unique as the business that you run. So it is an ability to predefine the content of your jobs, but how you construct that is entirely up to you. It is a collection of phases, tasks, costs, milestones. It's all sorts of things in there. So again, it's so flexible, more than we can talk about here today. In terms of job statuses, I'll attack those first. Here, you have the ability to set up statuses of your own choosing. So not only will you have the standard ones, you can add in, as I have done, all sorts of things. So literally, it's entirely up to you what you include, the order that you put them in, so you can move them around, and even color coding them. So if I clicked into create a new job status, I can give it another name. So this might be fully invoiced, because I didn't have that one. I can then say whether this is a standard job state, so it's an active job. Is it on hold, and therefore we don't want it to appear in staff calendars? Should it be therefore marked as completed and essentially put to bed? Should it be marked as cancelled and therefore essentially scrubbed? It's still listed, but it's being cancelled. If it is anything other than these last 2 that are archived, you can also choose whether to show it in My Jobs, in the schedule, lock it in terms of adding further costs or timesheets to it. So you can be quite flexible in terms of what these allow you to do. It's very, very good if you want to take advantage of this. And you can also set your default colors. So your background color, your border color, and your text color. So if I said that I wanted this to be in bright yellow and I want my text and my border to be in red, I absolutely can do. And again, you can see what we've got. We've got our key indicators there at the bottom. So you can build those using the same items if you want to, but just very, very easy to put that in place. So feel free to, I wouldn't say go wild, but at least modify this list so that it's more representative of your process. What we don't want is a list 100 miles long. If you come to a job and you've got to change that job state to something that is, halfway down a page, then really we're kind of missing the point on that one. So if I was looking at this, I'm not in a job, I'm in a lead. Let me come back to my jobs and I'll go into a job. Whether it be on just the job list under job manager, obviously we can click on the drop down there and select our job states. See how mine just goes and goes and goes. You might not want anything quite as lengthy as that. You might just want something a lot more succinct. Same is true in here. If we're going to the status, there's our list. It's just up to you what you require. The other option that we want to explore is job category. Job category, again, is primarily just a label so that we can differentiate between the types of work that we are performing. We can report upon this, etc. This is something that we can absolutely include in your customized reporting. But what we also have within here is one of the levels of override that apply when we are dealing with your Xero integration. Now, again, I'm not going to go into that too much, but you can see here where I've got an income account and a cost of sale account specified for this job category. So it is very feasible to override your basic settings of your integration at a job category level. So have a think about that. And again, it's something that you can absolutely take advantage of if you need to. Look at what we're up to. Nearly features. So again, in terms of features, what have we got? If we click into the features tab within your settings, so we've gone to business and settings, and now we've clicked on features, we get 3 items. Custom fields. Wow, we could, again, spend a long time talking about custom fields. You can create unique fields in your own system that help you capture more data about your jobs, your clients, your costs, your tasks, your leads. All of these areas at the top are open for the addition of new custom fields. Now, all that they will do is give you the ability to capture data, but you can capture it in all sorts of different ways. So when I want to create a new custom field, I might choose to create it as a drop-down list, or as a text field, or as a decimal, or a link to an external website or a date or whatever I want to do. So you've got so much flexibility in terms of these. Really, it's up to you what you want to include. You also have the option of making them mandatory. So you do get the chance to say you must fill this in, otherwise you can't finish creating your job or adding something to your client record, whatever it might be. So again, think about that. Try and be sensible about what you include. Don't go mad. We don't need to know what your client's tennis partner is called. You know, it's just about keeping it relevant and real. Custom templates, again, be aware that these are here. This is a webinar all in its own right about building custom templates. But essentially, you've got samples that you can refer to. These will allow you to create your own customized documents for sending to a client. So that might be an invoice, it might be a quote, it might be a purchase order if you're sending that to your supplier, could be a job brief, which is a very, very flexible template in there. Again, be aware that you can do this, but certainly in terms of details, you know, we will present this in a future session and you'll be able to see that in a lot more detail. Won't we, Liz? Because it'll probably be you.
That will be me, that one.
Maybe, you never know. And finally, have personalize in here. And personalize is just that. There's one or two options that you can explore within here. The first one is logos. So there's a general logo option, and then there's a report logo option. So they're both in here. You'll see when this switches over. They both require your logo file to be in JPG format and to be 930 by 310 pixels. And very importantly, it needs to be 300 DPI. So if it's not, it will not upload. There are articles in the Help Center to be able to be found under here, under Help Center, about how to format your logos so that they will fit. If you haven't got it right, it won't fit. If you try to follow the article and it still doesn't fit, contact support. But yes, it is doable. It's just sometimes a little bit of a pain.
In your account logo, you're going to want to kind of configure so it looks nice in the little circle, because that's where it appears. You haven't got one in yours, have you?
I haven't. No, but it would literally appear up here, wouldn't it?
No, it would appear to that there. That's where it appears. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you usually have to chop and make. I usually create a little avatar for the client, so it's not the whole logo. It's just a little bit of it, just so it looks nice in the circle.
Oh, there you go. That sounds like a very good idea, actually, Liz. So yes, I quite agree with you.
Otherwise, it appears. Otherwise, it appears all stretched and looks horrible. So,
no, as you say, it's all about getting it to look right. So if it needs a little bit of work beforehand, you're only going to do it once. So it's maybe worth a little bit of time in. The other option under personalize is your email options. Now, again, this is when we're sending emails from within Workflow Max. If, for example, we are sending invoices from Workflow Max, you can say who the sender is. It's the only time we can change who the sender is from Workflow Max. Bearing in mind, we did say if you want to click on send an email and send something externally, that is not the same as, for example, clicking into a quote and clicking email. That's different. That would then use what we've got here. In terms of these options, you can see in terms of the subject lines, we've got subject lines for the invoice, for a quote, for an estimate, for a purchase order, for a notification about a job. All of these things just change the subject line. So the only thing that we can change in terms of where it comes from is with regard to invoices. So fairly limited in its scope, but potentially useful. Again, if there's anything that you need to change on that, it's maybe worth having a little look at. But yeah, that is your feature settings there. Wow, what an hour.
Yeah, it did take an hour. We thought we might come up a bit short on this one, but
I mean, we haven't gone into the likes of notifications and setting those up. You know, that's a whole what you want to include. I would say it's not fully finished yet. You know, there are a lot of notifications still to come, so it's something that, you know, bear that in mind. Likewise, integrations. My goodness, you know, this is a totally separate subject of how you get the best from your integrations with things like Xero. You know, that's a whole big its own right. But yes, those underpinning and often, you know, elusive little things that when you're setting up your system, this is what it does. Absolutely. These are the ones that in the most part you were referring to. So I hope that's been helpful, folks. Did we have any? I think we've answered all the questions as we've gone. Am I right, Liz?
Yeah, the team have been totally on top of it and answered everything for us. So that's nice.
So much you're up for the help.
Yeah, yes. I was just going I was just going to add that keep an eye on the general settings page, because new settings are coming out fairly regularly as the product evolves. And I think we showed one today about the POs and the markup. So yeah,
Just
you
that,
didn't, yeah, that, and you
that
you
one
don't
there.
know they're there, do you? Mm.
But this is just it. I mean, this one was, you know, we saw that be created. It was a couple of months ago now. Absolutely,
Yes.
you know, this was something that was needed, and therefore it appeared. So,
and the one below it is a very recent one. So
yeah, absolutely. All of these are really in response to, you know, I was going to say fan requests there, requests from you guys out there saying this is what we need the system to do. Is evidence that BlueRock is doing its best to give you what you need. So I hope that has helped in terms of at least understanding where they come from and what you can do. But yes, we'll, where's the general settings page? Well, the general settings page is by clicking onto your business tab and coming down to click on settings. If I do that, it takes me straight into general settings, beginning with organization settings. So as this refreshes,
we use the cog as well to the left of your profile name.
Absolutely, you can click that. It will do that as well. So it's a shortcut. It depends on how you want to get there, but it will always take you to the same place. Again, whoop, sorry, we've stopped the screen share. Let me fire that up again. So yes, thank you so much for your time today, everybody. I hope that has been useful to you. Please join us again for another session in which we will go through the nitty-gritty of getting the most out of Workflow. So yeah, thanks Liz again for your time today. Thank you. Wonderful BlueRock team in the background there, and we will see you all again very, very soon. Bye for now.